Have you ever felt like giving up on learning English because every word feels heavy and every conversation feels impossible? What if the classroom you almost quit became the place where your life quietly changed, where learning English slowly, sharing simple stories, and studying at an American community college unexpectedly opened the door to love, family, and a completely new life in America? A question in the classroom. Have you ever sat in a classroom, staring at a sentence so simple that a child could read it, yet your mouth refuses to say it? That was me. And here is the strange part. The place where I almost gave up learning English became the place where I found love, confidence, and a new life in America. Not a movie love story. Not a dramatic fairy tale. Just a quiet story that began inside a small American Community College ESL classroom. If you are learning English slowly, if you sometimes feel embarrassed when speaking, if you ever think your progress is too slow, this story might sound very familiar. Because a few years ago, I was exactly where you are now. I still remember my first morning walking into the community college in the United States. Outside, the air was cold. Much colder than what I was used to. American winters feel different. The sky looked huge, the campus was quiet, and students walked quickly with coffee cups in their hands. Everyone looked confident. Everyone looked like they knew exactly where they were going. Except me. Inside my backpack, I had a notebook, a cheap pen, and a small dictionary. On the first page I had written 3 words. Learn English well. Start a new life. Simple words. But at that moment, those words felt very heavy. The classroom door had a small sign that said, ESL, English is a second language. Inside the room, about 15 students sat quietly. Some were from Mexico. Some from Korea. One older woman from Brazil. A young man from Ukraine. And me. We were all adults. But when it came to English, we all felt like beginners. Our teacher, Mrs. Thompson, walked in with a warm smile. She spoke slowly, clearly, the way many ESL teachers in American colleges do. Good morning, everyone, she said. Half the class answered. Good morning. Some voices were confident. Some voices were shy. Mine was almost invisible. If you have ever studied English listening and speaking practice, you probably know this feeling. Your brain understands the sentence, but your mouth hesitates. There is actually a reason for that. According to language learning research from the University of California, when adults learn a new language, the brain often activates the error monitoring system. That means your brain becomes very sensitive to mistakes. In simple words, your brain keeps whispering. Be careful, don't say it wrong. And when that whisper becomes too loud, something funny happens. You stop speaking. Not because you don't know the words, but because your brain is trying to protect you from embarrassment. That was exactly my situation during my first weeks of English learning in America. Mrs. Thompson wrote a sentence on the whiteboard. Please introduce yourself. Very simple. But when it was my turn, my heart started beating faster. My name is. Then I stopped. My brain suddenly forgot every English word I had studied for years. The class was quiet. I wanted to disappear. Have you ever felt that moment? When 10 seconds feel like 10 minutes? Mrs. Thompson did something interesting. She smiled. Then she said slowly, "Take your time. English grows slowly." That sentence stayed with me. English grows slowly. Not quickly. Not perfectly. Slowly. And strangely, that moment changed how I saw learning. Most people think language learning is like climbing a mountain. Fast. Hard. Competitive. But in reality, learning English through daily stories is more like growing a small plant. Water it every day. Give it sunlight. Wait. And one day, it grows. That morning, after class ended, students started packing their bags. Some spoke in Spanish. Some spoke in Korean. Some spoke in broken English. And then something unexpected happened. A voice next to me said, "Your English is not bad." I turned my head. A student was sitting one chair away from me. She had been quiet during class too. She smiled. "My English also, very slow," she said, laughing a little. Her sentence was simple. But it felt honest. For the first time that day, I relaxed. "Where are you from?" she asked. I answered slowly. "I am from Asia." She nodded. "First time in America?" "Yes." Then she said something that surprised me. "I think community college is a good place to start life here." That sentence stayed in my mind for the rest of the day. Because she was right. American community colleges are special places. They are not just for teenagers starting university. They are for immigrants, working parents, people changing careers, and people learning English as a second language. In other words, they are full of people starting again. New language. New dreams. New lives. And sometimes, new love stories. But of course, I did not know that yet. At that moment, she was just a classmate who spoke simple English slowly, just like me. We walked out of the classroom together. Outside, the wind was cold again. Students rushed across campus. Cars passed on the road. The American flag moved gently in the wind. She looked at me and said, "Maybe we practice English after class sometimes?" Just a small idea. Just a simple suggestion. But sometimes the smallest conversations change the biggest parts of your life. At that moment, I thought we were just talking about English speaking practice. I had no idea that this small conversation inside a quiet ESL classroom in an American community college would slowly turn into the most important story of my life. And it all started with one very simple question. A question that looked like homework. But later, it felt like destiny. "Please introduce yourself." My first days in America. The first mistake I made in America happened before my first English sentence. It happened at a grocery store. I stood in front of a cashier, holding milk, bread, and eggs. The cashier smiled and asked a question. A very normal American question. How's your day going? My brain froze. Because in my country, cashiers don't ask that. They just scan items. But in the United States, small talk is everywhere. In grocery stores. On buses. In elevators. Even when strangers pass each other on the sidewalk. The problem? I understood the words. But I didn't understand the culture. So I panicked and answered something strange. I am going home. The cashier looked confused. I looked confused. The line behind me got longer. Welcome to life in America as a new English learner. Moments like that happened a lot during my first weeks. If you are studying English listening and speaking, you might already know this feeling. The grammar is not the hardest part. The hardest part is real life. Real conversations move fast. People use slang. They shorten words. And sometimes they ask questions that are not really questions. For example, how's it going? What's up? Doing good? Most Americans don't expect a long answer. Often, the simple reply is just, good, thanks. But when you are new to American English conversation, your brain starts searching for perfect grammar, perfect vocabulary, perfect pronunciation. And while your brain searches, the conversation is already finished. Scientists who study language learning psychology call this processing delay. Your brain is translating too much instead of communicating. That was exactly what I was doing. Every day felt like a small language puzzle. The bus driver would say something quickly. The barista at a coffee shop would ask another question. A classmate in my community college ESL program would start a casual conversation. And every time, my brain needed 3 seconds longer than everyone else. 3 seconds can feel very long in conversation. But here's something interesting I learned later. Research from Harvard's Language Lab suggests that adult language learners often improve faster when they focus on communication instead of perfection. In simple words, speak first, fix later. But during my first days in the United States, I didn't know that yet. I was still trying to be perfect. One afternoon after ESL class, I walked around the community college campus. American campuses are very different from what I imagined before coming here. In movies, college looks exciting and loud. But in reality, a community college in the United States often feels calm. Students sit on the grass reading textbooks. Some study in the library for hours. Others drink coffee and work on laptops. And many students are not teenagers. Some are parents. Some are immigrants learning English. Some are people starting a second career. This made me feel less alone. I was not the only person trying to build a new life. Still, there was another challenge. The weather. If you come from a warm country, your first winter in America feels like entering another planet. The wind is colder. The mornings are darker. Sometimes snow covers the sidewalks. The first time I saw snow, I was excited. The third time, not so much. I remember walking to class one morning with cold hands, trying to read English vocabulary on my phone while snowflakes landed on the screen. Community. Opportunity. Education. These words appeared often in American education system brochures. Community college offers opportunity. Education opens doors. I liked these ideas. But sometimes when you are alone in a new country, big words feel far away. Real life is smaller. Real life is things like understanding a bus schedule, buying the right groceries, answering a simple question in English without freezing. That same week, something unexpected happened again. After our ESL listening and speaking class, the same classmate who spoke to me earlier walked beside me toward the campus exit. She carried a notebook filled with English vocabulary. I noticed something interesting. Some words had small drawings next to them. Next to the word weather, she drew a cloud. Next to the word family, she drew 3 stick figures. Next to the word love, she drew a small heart. You draw to remember words? I asked slowly. She smiled. Yes. My brain remembers pictures better. That idea sounded simple. But it was actually very smart. According to cognitive learning research, the brain remembers language faster when words connect to images or emotions. That's why learning English through stories works so well. Stories create images. Images create memory. And memory creates confidence. We sat on the bench outside the classroom building. Students walked by. A dog barked somewhere across the lawn. The afternoon sun was low and golden. Why did you come to America? She asked. That question was bigger than any vocabulary word. I thought for a moment. Then I answered honestly. To start again. She nodded slowly. I think many people in community college come for that reason. She was right. Community college is not just about education. It's about second chances. New languages. New careers. New identities. And sometimes, new relationships. But again, I still did not think about love. At that moment, she was simply someone who understood how difficult learning English slowly in America could be. Someone who did not laugh when I made grammar mistakes. Someone who also spoke carefully, word by word. Then she said something that sounded like a simple plan. Maybe we practice English together, she suggested. Like, conversation practice. My first reaction was nervous. Practicing English with another person meant more speaking. More mistakes. More embarrassment. But another part of me knew something important. Language grows when you use it. Not when you hide from it. So I nodded. Okay, I said. Maybe we try. Neither of us knew that these small English practice conversations would slowly change everything. Because sometimes the most important chapters of your life don't begin with a big moment. They begin with a quiet agreement between 2 people sitting on a cold bench outside an American community college. And the story was only beginning. The Quiet ESL Classroom. Have you ever noticed something strange about learning English in real life? Sometimes the most important conversation doesn't happen in a busy place. It happens in a quiet room, with two people speaking very slow English, making many mistakes, and somehow understanding each other better than anyone else. That is exactly what started happening inside our ESL classroom at the American Community College. At first, our English practice was simple. Very simple. After class, we would sit near the window or outside on a wooden bench and talk. Not about complicated topics. Not about politics or business. Just small life stories. What food do you like? What did you do yesterday? Do you miss your home country? Our sentences were slow. Sometimes broken. Sometimes funny. But they were real. And something interesting happens when people practice English speaking through real stories. The conversation slowly becomes deeper. Not because the grammar improves quickly, but because the comfort grows. During our second week practicing together, we tried something new. Instead of only talking, we decided to read short English stories aloud. This idea actually came from our ESL teacher. Mrs. Thompson once explained something fascinating about language learning and the brain. She said when you combine listening, reading, and speaking English at the same time, the brain creates stronger memory connections. It's called multisensory language learning. In simple words, when you see the word, hear the word, and speak the word, your brain remembers it faster. So we tried it. We opened a small beginner English book from the campus library. The story was simple. A boy moves to a new city. He feels lonely. He meets new friends. Nothing dramatic. But reading it together felt surprisingly powerful. First she read a paragraph slowly. Then I read the next one. Sometimes we stopped to explain vocabulary. Sometimes we laughed when we pronounced a word incorrectly. I remember one word that caused us trouble. Comfortable. I said it like this. Comfortably. She laughed gently. No. Americans say comfortably. English pronunciation can be very funny. The spelling says one thing. The sound says another. But moments like that actually help the brain remember. Studies in applied linguistics show that emotional reactions, like laughter or surprise, help language memory become stronger. So every small mistake was actually helping us learn. That afternoon, the classroom was almost empty. Sunlight came through the windows and stretched across the desks. Outside, students walked across campus carrying backpacks and coffee cups. Inside, two international students sat quietly practicing English. It wasn't impressive. It wasn't dramatic. But something important was happening. Confidence. Slowly. Very slowly. I noticed something interesting about her learning style. Whenever she didn't know a word, she didn't stop speaking. Instead, she described the word. For example, one time she forgot the word umbrella. So she said, "The thing you use when rain falls, you hold it above your head. I laughed. You mean umbrella? She smiled proudly. Yes. Umbrella. This technique is actually one of the most effective strategies for English-speaking fluency. Language experts call it circumlocution. Instead of stopping when you don't know a word, you explain the idea with other words. Native speakers do this all the time without thinking. But many English learners are afraid to try it. They stop speaking completely when vocabulary disappears. But that day I learned something important. Fluency is not about knowing every word. Fluency is about continuing the conversation. That afternoon our conversations slowly moved away from the storybook. We started talking about life again. Do you like America so far? She asked. I thought carefully before answering. Some parts, yes. And some parts? Difficult. She nodded. I feel the same. Living in a new country changes how you see everything. Food tastes different. The weather feels different. Even silence feels different. In America, people are friendly. But they are also busy. Everyone moves quickly. Everyone has somewhere to go. Sometimes that makes a new immigrant feel invisible. But inside that quiet community college ESL classroom, things felt different. People were patient. People understood mistakes. People were starting new chapters of life. That's why many experts say community colleges in the United States are powerful places for immigrants. They are not only schools. They are bridges between cultures. Language bridges. Life bridges. Dream bridges. And sometimes, emotional bridges too. One afternoon while we practiced reading, she asked me a question that surprised me. Do you believe education changes life? I paused. That sounded like a big philosophical question. For a moment, I thought about the words on my notebook from the first day. Learn English well. Start a new life. So I answered honestly. Yes. But slowly. She smiled. Yes, slowly. Then she said something that stayed in my mind for many years. Maybe education opens more than jobs. What do you mean? I asked. She looked around the quiet classroom. Then she said softly. Maybe it opens people. At the time, I didn't fully understand what she meant. But later, I realized she was right. Education doesn't only teach vocabulary or grammar. It opens conversations. It opens friendships. It opens confidence. And sometimes it opens something even more unexpected. But that day, we were still just two students practicing slow English conversation. Reading stories. Making mistakes. Learning small words. And slowly learning about each other. The strange thing about life is that the most important relationships rarely begin with dramatic moments. They begin with ordinary routines. A classroom. A shared book. A simple question. And two people who are brave enough to keep speaking, even when their English is not perfect. Looking back now, I realize something. That Quiet ESL Classroom wasn't just where I learned English. It was where the first small seeds of something much bigger were quietly beginning to grow. But at the time, neither of us noticed. Not yet. Small conversations, big feelings. Here's a strange truth about learning English in America. Sometimes the sentence that changes your life is not a big sentence. Not a perfect sentence. Not even a grammatically correct sentence. Sometimes it is just 5 simple words spoken slowly between 2 people who are still learning. And one afternoon, inside our Quiet Community College campus, 5 small words surprised me more than any English lesson. You speak more confident now. That was what she said. Not perfect grammar. But the meaning was clear. And the moment felt bigger than the sentence. Because a few weeks earlier, I could barely introduce myself in our ESL classroom. Now, somehow, our conversations were lasting 30 minutes, sometimes an hour. Something had changed. But it wasn't just my vocabulary. It was something deeper. Confidence. If you study English speaking practice, researchers often say confidence grows from repetition. Your brain slowly stops treating the language as a threat. In the beginning, every English conversation feels like a test. But after enough small conversations, your brain starts to relax. The fear becomes curiosity. The silence becomes conversation. And the mistakes become normal. That was exactly what was happening to both of us. Our routine became simple. After class, we walked across the American Community College campus, found a quiet place, and talked. Sometimes near the library. Sometimes near the student center. Sometimes outside under a tree. The topics were always ordinary. But ordinary topics can reveal extraordinary things about people. What music do you like? What food do you miss from home? What do you want to do in the future? One afternoon she asked something different. Do you believe in love? I laughed. That is a big question for English practice. She laughed too. Yes, maybe too big. But the question stayed in the air between us. At that time, I thought she was simply practicing conversation topics. Many ESL conversation textbooks include questions about relationships, family, and emotions. These topics help students learn useful vocabulary like relationship, marriage, family life, future plans. But something about that moment felt slightly different. Not uncomfortable. Just interesting. I answered honestly. I believe love exists, I said slowly. But life is complicated. She nodded. Yes, especially in another country. Living in the United States as an immigrant creates a strange emotional experience. Your future feels open, but also uncertain. Your opportunities grow, but so does your responsibility. And sometimes loneliness becomes stronger because everything around you is new. Many international students and immigrants in America experience this. Psychologists even have a name for it, cultural transition stress. Your brain is learning new systems, new language, New social rules. It's exciting, but also exhausting. That's why small friendships become very important. They create stability inside an unfamiliar environment. Looking back, our daily English conversation practice was doing something more than improving grammar. It was building trust. And trust grows quietly. Like language. Slowly. That day we sat outside near the student center. The campus was busy. Students walked past carrying backpacks. A group of teenagers laughed loudly near the coffee shop. A professor rode a bicycle across the path. American college life looked energetic and confident. But our little conversation felt like a peaceful island inside all that noise. "Why did you choose community college?" she asked. Another interesting question. "In my country," I said slowly, "community college is not very common." She nodded. "Same in my country." Then she added something thoughtful. "But here, community college feels like a second chance." That sentence felt very true. In the American education system, community colleges are often underestimated. Many people think universities are more prestigious. But community colleges have something unique. They welcome everyone. Teenagers. Working parents. Immigrants. People changing careers. People learning English. In other words, people who are rebuilding their lives. And rebuilding life often requires courage. Maybe that's why the people there felt more honest. More patient. More open. Later that afternoon we returned to the classroom to practice reading again. Our teacher had written a short sentence on the whiteboard. Every story begins somewhere. She asked each student to create a short story using that sentence. Most students wrote simple answers. A boy moves to a new city. A woman finds a new job. When it was my turn, I hesitated. Then I wrote something simple. Two students practice English together. The class smiled. Mrs. Thompson nodded. Good, she said. Simple stories are powerful. Then she asked a surprising question. Where do you think that story might go? The class started offering ideas. They become good friends. They start a business. They travel together. Everyone laughed. The answers were creative. But one idea made the classroom suddenly quiet. An older student in the back smiled and said, Maybe they fall in love. The room filled with soft laughter. Even I laughed. It sounded like a movie plot. But life rarely follows movie scripts. Or so I thought. When class ended, we walked outside again. The sun was beginning to set. The sky turned orange above the buildings of the community college campus. Neither of us mentioned the comment about love. Instead, she said something simple. Tomorrow we practice again? I nodded. Yes, tomorrow. But while walking back to the bus stop, I noticed something strange. Our conversations were changing. Not dramatically. Not suddenly. Just slightly deeper. Slightly warmer. Like a slow sunrise that you barely notice at first. Because sometimes the most important emotions in life don't arrive like fireworks. They arrive quietly. Inside small conversations. Between two people practicing slow English speaking on an ordinary college campus. And neither of them realizes yet that their simple ESL practice routine is slowly becoming the beginning of something much bigger. Learning language through life. Have you ever noticed something strange about learning English in real life? The moment you stop treating English like a school subject and start using it to talk about your real life, your brain suddenly begins learning much faster. It's almost like the language wakes up. That discovery changed everything for us. Because one afternoon, our English practice routine at the community college stopped feeling like homework and started feeling like real conversations between two people trying to understand life. And strangely, that was the moment our English began improving the fastest. At first, our routine was simple. After class, we sat somewhere quiet and practiced. But slowly, the topics became more personal. Instead of reading short stories from textbooks, we started telling our own stories. Childhood memories. Family traditions. Funny cultural misunderstandings in America. And something fascinating began happening. When you talk about real experiences, your brain automatically searches for words with emotion attached. Emotion is powerful for memory. According to research in cognitive language learning, emotional storytelling helps the brain store vocabulary more deeply than memorizing isolated words. That means telling a personal story in English is often more effective than studying a vocabulary list. Without realizing it, we were using one of the most effective methods for learning English through storytelling. One afternoon, while sitting near the campus library, she asked me something simple. What was your family like? That question opened a long conversation. I described my parents. I described the food we used to eat together. I described family dinners, noisy celebrations, and the way relatives would visit unexpectedly. My English was slow. Sometimes I paused to search for words. Sometimes I explained ideas with simple sentences. But she listened carefully. When I finished, she smiled and said, "In America, families are different sometimes." "What do you mean?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "People are busy. Work a lot. Children leave home early." She wasn't criticizing American culture. She was simply observing something many immigrants notice. The American lifestyle often values independence very strongly. Teenagers move out. Young adults build their own lives. Families love each other deeply, but they often live separately. In many other cultures, families stay closer physically. Living in the United States can make immigrants reflect on these differences. And these reflections became part of our English practice. We were not just learning grammar. We were comparing cultures, talking about traditions, explaining habits. And every explanation forced us to use new English vocabulary. Words like tradition, independence, responsibility, family values. Our conversations were slowly becoming more complex. But something else was happening too. We were beginning to learn about each other's fears. One afternoon she asked quietly, "Were you scared moving to America?" I laughed softly. Very. Then I explained something honestly. When people watch videos about life in the United States, they often imagine opportunity, success, and freedom. But they rarely see the invisible challenges. Loneliness, language barriers, financial pressure, cultural confusion. Many immigrants carry these silent stresses during their first years. Psychologists call this acculturation stress. Your brain is constantly adjusting to new rules. Even small things become difficult. Ordering food, understanding jokes, talking to strangers. But sharing these experiences in English turned out to be surprisingly helpful. Because when you explain a difficult moment, the language becomes meaningful. Instead of saying random practice sentences like "the cat is on the table," we were saying things like, "I felt lost my first week here. I didn't understand the bus driver. I missed my family." Those sentences were real. And real sentences stay in your memory longer. One afternoon we tried a new exercise. We decided to record our conversation on a phone. Then we listened to it. At first, it was painful. Listening to your own voice in another language can feel uncomfortable. You hear every mistake, every awkward pause, every strange pronunciation. But something interesting happened after a few minutes. We started noticing improvement. Our sentences were longer. Our pauses were shorter. Our confidence was stronger. This technique is actually recommended by many English-speaking coaches. Recording your conversations allows you to observe progress over time. And progress is extremely motivating. Motivation is critical for language learning. Without motivation, the brain stops investing energy. But when you see improvement, the brain releases dopamine, the chemical associated with reward and progress. In simple words, your brain starts enjoying the process. And that's exactly what began happening to us. Our English practice sessions slowly became the most relaxing part of our day. Sometimes we talked for an hour. Sometimes 2 hours passed without us noticing. One evening the sky turned dark earlier than usual. Winter was approaching. Campus lights turned on. Students walked quickly toward the parking lot. Cold air moved through the trees. We were still sitting on a bench outside the library. She looked up at the dark sky and said something thoughtful. "Funny, we started practicing English." I nodded. Yes. But now it feels like we practice life. That sentence stayed with me. Because she was right. Language is not separate from life. Language is life. Every memory. Every feeling. Every dream. All of it lives inside words. When you learn a new language, you slowly gain a new way to experience the world. That realization made our practice feel more meaningful. We weren't just learning English listening and speaking. We were learning how to express ourselves in a completely new world. But that evening, as we walked toward the bus stop, something subtle changed again. Our conversations were becoming warmer, more natural, more comfortable. And somewhere inside those long English storytelling sessions, a quiet emotional connection was beginning to grow. Not dramatic, not obvious. Just a gentle feeling that this friendship was becoming something more important than we first expected. But neither of us said anything about it. Not yet. Because sometimes feelings grow quietly, the same way language does. Word by word. Conversation by conversation. On an ordinary evening outside an American community college. Cultural differences and surprises. Let me tell you something surprising about life and relationships in America. The hardest part is not learning English. The hardest part is understanding what people actually mean when they speak. Because sometimes Americans say things very directly, and sometimes they say things that sound casual but carry deeper meaning. And one afternoon, a simple sentence she said made me realize that culture can completely change how two people understand the same moment. It happened after our usual English conversation practice at the community college. The day had been long. We finished our ESL class, walked across the campus, and sat near the student center like always. Students were everywhere. Some were studying with laptops. Others were talking loudly, drinking coffee, laughing about something. American college campuses often feel energetic like that. But our little corner felt calm. We started talking about something new that day, dating culture in the United States. It happened because during class, another student mentioned going on a date. That word date sparked a big conversation among our classmates. In many cultures, dating is very different. Sometimes families play a bigger role. Sometimes relationships move slower. Sometimes faster. And in America, the rules can feel confusing. So after class she asked me a question. Do people date like Americans in your country? I laughed. Not really. She smiled. Same for mine. Then she explained something she had noticed since arriving in the United States. In America, people ask directly, she said. Like, do you want to get coffee? That sounded normal. But she shook her head. In some countries, that question means friendship. In America, sometimes it means a date. That difference may sound small. But when two people come from different cultures, small differences create big misunderstandings. Cross-cultural psychologists call this communication context difference. Some cultures communicate indirectly. Others communicate very directly. The United States is generally considered a low-context culture, meaning people often express intentions more openly. But if you grew up in a more indirect culture, that directness can feel surprising. Or confusing. Or even intimidating. That afternoon we started comparing cultural habits. What about relationships? She asked. I thought for a moment. In my culture, I said slowly, people sometimes take a long time before expressing feelings. She nodded. Yes, patience. Then she laughed. In America, sometimes people move faster. She wasn't criticizing it. She was just observing. And honestly, she was right. The American lifestyle often encourages independence and personal decision-making. People feel more comfortable expressing interest openly. But when two immigrants from different backgrounds meet inside a community college ESL classroom, those cultural expectations don't always apply. Everything moves slower. More carefully. More thoughtfully. And maybe that's why our connection felt comfortable. We were both navigating a new culture at the same time. Later that afternoon, something slightly awkward happened. We were practicing English by asking each other questions from a conversation book. One question read, "Describe your ideal partner." We both laughed immediately. That is a dangerous English question, I joked. But we decided to answer anyway. She went first. My ideal partner, she said slowly, choosing each word carefully, is patient, kind, and not afraid of mistakes. I nodded. That sounds good. Then she looked at me and asked, "What about you?" I hesitated. Not because the English was difficult. Because the answer suddenly felt more personal than I expected. My ideal partner, I said slowly, is someone who understands struggle. She looked thoughtful. Why struggle? Because life always has challenges, I replied. Especially when you start again in another country. She nodded slowly. Yes, that is true. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The campus noise continued around us. Students walking. Cars passing. Someone laughing loudly near the cafeteria. But in that small pause, something new appeared between us. Awareness. Not romantic drama. Not a movie moment. Just a quiet awareness that our conversations were becoming more meaningful. At that time, neither of us said the obvious question. Are we just friends? Or something more? Instead, she changed the subject slightly. Do you like American food? She asked. I laughed again. Some of it. What is your favorite? Probably burgers, I said. Very American. She smiled. Yes, community college lunch. Food became another fun part of our English practice routine. Sometimes we would buy cheap meals from the campus cafeteria and continue our conversations there. Eating together created another interesting language advantage. According to social learning research, shared activities like eating can improve communication comfort. When people focus on an activity, the pressure of conversation decreases. That makes speaking a new language easier. So our English became more natural. More relaxed. Sometimes we even forgot we were practicing. But cultural differences continued surprising us. One evening while walking across campus, a couple passed us holding hands. She noticed it and asked a curious question. In your culture, is public affection normal? I thought for a moment. Not very common, I answered. She nodded. In mine too. In the United States, public affection like holding hands or hugging is very normal. But for many immigrants, it feels unusual at first. That moment made us both laugh a little. Because suddenly we realized something funny. We were spending hours together every week. Talking. Walking. Practicing English. Sharing personal stories. But neither of us had defined what our relationship actually was. Friendship? Study partners? Something else? And maybe that uncertainty made everything feel slightly exciting. Not dramatic. Just interesting. As the sky turned darker that evening, we walked toward the parking lot. Cold wind moved through the campus trees. She looked at me and said something simple. Learning English here is more interesting than I expected. I smiled. Yes. Then she added something quietly. Because of the conversations. At the time, I thought she meant our language practice. But looking back now, I realize she might have meant something deeper. Because sometimes education does more than teach vocabulary or grammar. Sometimes it creates unexpected connections between people who might never have met otherwise. And inside that small American community college, between English lessons and cultural surprises, our story was slowly moving towards something neither of us had planned. When life gets difficult. Here is something nobody tells you when you start learning English in America. The language is not always the hardest part. Sometimes the hardest part is life itself. Bills arrive. Work becomes exhausting. Loneliness appears when you least expect it. And suddenly the motivation you once had for learning English, studying at community college, and building a new future begins to feel very heavy. That was the moment our story entered its most difficult chapter. Up until that point, our English practice conversations had felt almost easy. We met after class. We talked. We read stories. We laughed about pronunciation mistakes. But real life outside the classroom was slowly becoming more complicated. For many immigrants and international students in the United States, this stage eventually arrives. At first, everything feels exciting. New country. New campus. New opportunities. But after a few months, reality begins to appear. Rent must be paid. Food costs money. Transportation costs money. And studying English at an American community college requires time and energy. For me, that pressure began growing quietly. I had taken a part-time job in the evening. The work was simple but tiring. Cleaning tables in a restaurant. Carrying heavy boxes in the kitchen. Sometimes finishing close to midnight. Then waking up early to attend ESL classes the next morning. At first I believed I could manage everything easily. But fatigue slowly changes your mind. Your body becomes tired. Your brain becomes slower. And learning a language requires energy. Research from cognitive science and language learning shows that fatigue reduces working memory capacity. In simple terms, when your brain is exhausted, it becomes harder to remember vocabulary and process sentences. That explains why my English suddenly felt worse. Words I had learned began disappearing from my memory. Conversations felt slower again. One afternoon after class, she immediately noticed something. "You look tired," she said. I tried to smile. "Just work." "What kind of work?" "Restaurant." She nodded quietly. Many immigrants understand this experience. Working while studying is extremely common in the American education system, especially at community colleges. But it can also become overwhelming. That day we still sat on our usual bench outside the library. But the conversation felt different. Slower. More serious. She looked at me and asked gently, "Do you still enjoy learning English?" The question surprised me. Because the honest answer was complicated. "Yes," I said. "But sometimes it feels difficult." She understood immediately. "I feel that too," she said. Then she shared something I didn't know before. She was also struggling. Her work schedule had changed recently. She was helping a family member financially. And sometimes she wondered if continuing school was the right decision. For the first time, our English conversation practice turned into something deeper. Instead of talking about vocabulary or culture, we were talking about doubt. Doubt is a powerful emotion. It whispers dangerous questions. Is this effort worth it? Maybe I should stop. Maybe this dream is too difficult. Many language learners experience this stage. Psychologists studying long-term motivation in language learning call it the plateau phase. At the beginning, progress feels fast. But after a while, improvement slows down. And when progress becomes invisible, motivation often disappears. That afternoon we both admitted something honestly. We had each thought about quitting. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just small thoughts appearing late at night. What if I stop ESL classes? What if I work full-time instead? What if this dream of speaking English fluently takes too long? Those thoughts are common among adult learners. Life responsibilities compete with education. And sometimes survival feels more urgent than long-term goals. The sky was gray that afternoon. Clouds moved slowly above the community college campus. Students walked quickly toward their cars. Cold wind moved through the trees. The mood felt heavy. Then she said something that surprised me. "Do you remember our first conversation?" I smiled faintly. "Yes. You said you came to America to start again." That was true. I had said that weeks earlier. She continued. "If you quit now, do you start again or stop again?" Her English sentence was simple. But the meaning was powerful. Sometimes simple language carries the strongest ideas. I thought carefully about her words. She was right. Learning English wasn't just about grammar or vocabulary. It represented something bigger. A chance to build a different future. Education often works like that. The results are not immediate. but the long-term impact can change entire lives. Studies from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics show that higher education levels strongly increase career opportunities and income potential. Community college degrees, certifications, and language skills often open doors that would otherwise remain closed. But statistics are not what motivated me in that moment. It was the reminder of why I started. The idea of building something new. And surprisingly, the support of someone who understood the struggle. She looked at me and said something quietly. We started practicing English together. Yes. Maybe we help each other continue. That idea changed the energy of the conversation. Instead of feeling alone in the struggle, suddenly it felt like a shared challenge. And shared challenges are easier to face. Social psychology research shows that peer support significantly increases persistence in education. When people feel accountable to someone else, they are more likely to continue difficult tasks. That afternoon we made a simple agreement. No dramatic promises. No complicated plan. Just something small. We keep practicing, she said. Even when we are tired. I nodded. Yes. Because sometimes success doesn't come from big motivational speeches. It comes from small consistent decisions repeated every day. That evening as we walked across the quiet American Community College campus, something felt different again. Life was still difficult. Work was still exhausting. English was still challenging. But the journey no longer felt lonely. And sometimes, that makes all the difference. Neither of us realized it yet. But that difficult season would eventually make our connection stronger than either of us expected. Because when two people face challenges together, something powerful begins to grow. And our story was slowly moving toward its most emotional turning point. The moment I almost gave up. Let me ask you an honest question. Have you ever reached a point in learning English where you suddenly think, maybe this is not for me? Not because you are lazy. Not because you don't care. But because life becomes too heavy, and your motivation slowly disappears. That moment arrived for me one cold evening in America. And if one small conversation had not happened that night, this entire story, this English learning journey, my education at an American community college, even the love story that followed, might have ended right there. It happened during the middle of winter. Winter on the community college campus looked very different from the bright autumn days when our story began. The trees were bare. The sky turned dark earlier. Cold wind moved across empty sidewalks. Students walked quickly from building to building, hiding their hands inside their jackets. And I was exhausted. Work had become harder. My evening job at the restaurant demanded more hours. Some nights I finished after midnight. Other nights I barely slept before morning ESL classes. When you combine physical exhaustion with language learning, your brain begins to resist. Even simple English conversations start feeling difficult again. That week, I noticed something frustrating. Words I had used easily before were suddenly difficult to remember. My listening felt slower. My speaking felt clumsy. It was like my brain had stepped backward. This experience is extremely common in second language learning. Linguists call it a temporary regression phase. When learners become tired or stressed, the brain prioritizes survival tasks over cognitive learning. In other words, your brain says, focus on work. Focus on survival. Language can wait. Unfortunately, motivation often disappears during this phase. And that is exactly what was happening to me. One evening after work, I sat alone on a bench near the community college parking lot. Snow covered parts of the ground. The campus was almost empty. Classes had finished hours earlier. I looked at the lights inside the classroom buildings and felt a strange thought growing in my mind. Maybe I should quit. Not permanently. Just temporarily. Maybe I should stop taking ESL classes. Work more hours. Save money. Return to school later. The idea felt practical. Responsible. Logical. Many immigrants make similar decisions when financial pressure becomes too strong. Education can always wait, right? But something about that thought made me feel uncomfortable. Because deep down, I knew the truth. Sometimes later quietly becomes never. While I was sitting there thinking about this, I heard footsteps on the snow. Someone was walking across the parking lot. I looked up. It was her. She was wearing a thick winter jacket and carrying her backpack. When she saw me, she looked surprised. "You are still here?" she asked. I forced a small smile. Just thinking. She sat beside me on the bench. For a moment we both looked at the quiet campus. Then she asked the question I was trying to avoid. "What are you thinking about?" I hesitated. But honesty felt easier than pretending. "I might stop school for a while," I said. She didn't react immediately. Instead, she asked gently, "Why?" "Work is busy," I explained. "Money is important. And learning English is slow." That last sentence felt heavy when I said it. Because it was true. Language learning takes time. Sometimes much more time than we expect. For a moment she stayed quiet. Then she said something simple. "Do you remember the first sentence our teacher told us?" I thought about it. Then it came back. English grows slowly. She nodded. Yes. So why are you surprised it is slow? I laughed quietly. She had a point. But I still felt uncertain. "What if I work for 1 year?" I said. "Then return to school later?" She looked at me carefully. Then she asked a question that changed everything. "Do you believe that will really happen?" Her tone wasn't critical. Just honest. And her question forced me to face something uncomfortable. When life becomes busy, returning to education becomes harder and harder. New responsibilities appear. Time disappears. Dreams slowly fade. Education requires momentum. If momentum stops, restarting becomes difficult. She continued speaking softly. When we started practicing English together, you were excited. That excitement helped you improve. But if you stop now, she paused, you might lose that momentum. Her words matched something psychologists often explain about long-term learning motivation. Consistency matters more than intensity. Even small daily progress keeps the brain engaged. Stopping completely breaks the learning rhythm. But she didn't stop there. Instead, she said something more personal. If you quit ESL classes, our practice stops too. I looked at her. That thought had not crossed my mind before. Our daily conversations. Our storytelling practice. Our long walks across the American Community College campus. All of it depended on school. Without school, those moments might disappear. And suddenly, I realized something surprising. English learning was no longer just an academic goal. It had become connected to a relationship. A friendship that had grown slowly through hundreds of small conversations. She smiled gently and said something that stayed with me for years. Education does not only open jobs. I recognized that sentence. She had said something similar months earlier. But this time she finished the idea differently. Sometimes education opens people. The cold winter air moved across the parking lot. Snow reflected the yellow campus lights. And suddenly my decision felt clearer. Quitting would not only close one door. It might close many. Language. Education. Opportunity. And maybe something more personal. So I took a deep breath. Then I said the simplest sentence of the night. Okay. She looked at me. Okay, what? I will continue. Her smile was immediate. Good. That night we walked together toward the bus stop. The campus was quiet. Snow fell lightly from the dark sky. And something inside me felt lighter than before. Because sometimes the moment you almost quit becomes the moment that defines your future. I didn't know it yet. But that small decision to continue learning English at the community college would eventually lead to something far more important than language. Skills. It would lead to the most unexpected chapter of this entire story. And that chapter was about to begin. Love growing slowly. Here's something most people never expect when they start learning English at an American community college. You think you are there to study vocabulary. You think you are there to practice grammar. But sometimes, without realizing it, you are also learning the language of another person's heart. And the strange thing about that language? It grows even slower than English. But once it begins, it becomes impossible to ignore. After the night I almost quit school, something quietly changed between us. Not dramatically. Not like in movies where music suddenly plays and everything becomes romantic. Instead, it changed the same way our English speaking skills had improved. Little by little. Conversation by conversation. And the first sign of that change appeared in a very simple moment. The next week after class, she asked something unusual. Do you want to get coffee? Now, if you remember our earlier conversation about American dating culture, you might understand why that question made me pause. In the United States, getting coffee can mean many things. Sometimes it means friendship. Sometimes it means something more. And sometimes, nobody knows exactly what it means. I smiled and answered carefully. Coffee sounds good. We walked to a small cafe just outside the community college campus. The place was warm and filled with the smell of roasted coffee beans. Students sat at small tables studying with laptops. Soft music played quietly in the background. For the first time, our English conversation practice was happening somewhere other than campus. And somehow that small change made everything feel slightly different. We ordered 2 coffees. The barista asked a fast question. Room or to go? A few months earlier, I might have panicked. But now I answered easily. For here. She noticed and smiled. Your English listening is much faster now. That comment made me realize something important. Without noticing it, our daily conversations had created real progress. Language researchers often explain that consistent conversational exposure dramatically increases fluency. When you speak English regularly with the same person, your brain learns their rhythm, pronunciation, and vocabulary patterns. Communication becomes smoother. And smoother communication creates emotional comfort. That comfort was growing between us. We sat near the window. Outside, students walked along the sidewalk, carrying backpacks and winter jackets. Inside, our conversation moved naturally. We talked about classes, work, future plans. But the tone felt warmer, more personal. At one point she asked something that surprised me again. Do you ever think about staying in America permanently? That question carried weight. For many immigrants, it represents a life decision, a future, a direction. I thought carefully before answering. Yes, I said. If life allows it. She nodded slowly. I think about that too. Then she added something thoughtful. But building life in another country is easier with the right people. Her sentence was simple. But the meaning behind it felt deeper. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, we continued talking about school. About career plans. About the American education system and how community colleges help students transfer to universities. But somewhere inside that conversation, an unspoken understanding was forming. We were no longer just classmates. No longer just English practice partners. Something softer, warmer, was growing quietly between us. And the funny part? Our English mistakes were still everywhere. Sometimes I mixed past and present tense. Sometimes she forgot articles like a and the. But instead of feeling embarrassed, those mistakes now felt almost charming. They reminded us how far we had come together. One evening while studying in the campus library, we tried another English learning technique. We wrote short life stories in English and read them aloud to each other. My story described my journey moving to America. Her story described leaving her home country and starting over. But near the end of her story, she added one unexpected sentence. Then I met someone who helped make the journey less lonely. When she finished reading, she looked slightly nervous. I understood immediately. Because my story had ended with a similar sentence. Then I found someone who made learning English feel less difficult. For a moment we both laughed quietly. Not because the sentences were funny. Because the meaning was obvious. Sometimes emotions appear in writing before people are brave enough to say them aloud. That evening we walked slowly across the community college campus again. The sky was clear. Stars were visible above the buildings. Cold air moved gently through the trees. Then she said something that felt simple, but important. You know something interesting? What? I asked. When we started learning English, everything was difficult. That's true. But now, she continued, speaking English feels easier. I nodded. Yes. Then she said the sentence that surprised me the most. Maybe because I enjoy the conversations. Her voice was calm. But the meaning behind it felt very clear. Enjoying conversations with someone often means enjoying the person too. And that realization created a quiet moment between us. Neither of us rushed to define what was happening. But both of us understood something had changed. Psychologists sometimes describe this stage of relationships as gradual emotional bonding. Instead of sudden attraction, feelings grow slowly through shared experiences, shared challenges, shared routines. And that perfectly described our situation. We had learned English together, faced doubts together, encouraged each other during difficult moments. And somewhere inside all those small experiences, affection had quietly grown. Not dramatic. Not overwhelming. Just steady. Like language learning itself. Before we reached the parking lot, she looked at me and said softly, "It's funny." What is? We came to community college to learn English. I smiled. Yes. Then she added something that made me laugh. But maybe we learned something else too. At that moment, I realized something important. Education had indeed opened a door. But not just the door to language or career opportunities. It had opened the door to a relationship neither of us expected when we first sat in that quiet ESL classroom months earlier. And the most surprising part? Our story was only halfway finished. Because the next chapter would ask a much bigger question. Could this quiet connection actually become a real future together? A simple American wedding dream. Let me ask you something interesting. When two people meet while learning English at an American community college, what do you think their future looks like? Do they simply finish school, say goodbye, and move on with their lives? Or can something that started as ESL conversation practice slowly grow into something much bigger, something like a real future together? That question quietly entered our lives one evening during the second year of my studies. By that time, many things had changed. Our English speaking skills had improved dramatically. Conversations that once required careful thinking now flowed naturally. We could talk about complex topics, career goals, cultural differences, life plans. Even our teacher had noticed the change. During one ESL listening and speaking class, Mrs. Thompson smiled and said something encouraging. "You two speak much more confidently now." Confidence. That word meant a lot. Because confidence is often the final step in language learning. Once your brain stops fearing mistakes, communication becomes natural. And natural communication creates something powerful. Connection. But as our English improved, another question slowly appeared. What happens after community college? For many students in the American education system, community college is just the beginning. Some students transfer to universities. Others pursue career training programs. Some enter the workforce directly. One afternoon after class, we sat outside near the same bench where many of our conversations had begun months earlier. The weather was warmer now. Spring had arrived on the community college campus. Flowers were blooming near the sidewalks. Students were studying on the grass. Everything felt lighter than the cold winter days when I almost quit. We were discussing future plans. "I might apply to transfer to a university," she said. "That's a good idea," I replied. "What about you?" "I'm thinking about it too," I said. Transferring to a university had once felt impossible. But now, after months of English listening, reading, and speaking practice, the idea felt realistic. Language had stopped being a barrier. And that's one of the beautiful things about education. When knowledge grows, possibilities expand. But then she asked a different kind of question. A life question. If you stay in America long term, what kind of life do you want? That question made me pause. Because it required imagining something beyond school. Beyond language learning. Beyond the present moment. "I want stability," I said slowly. "A career. A home. Maybe a family someday." She listened carefully. Then she smiled. "That sounds like a very American dream." I laughed. "Maybe community college is already changing me." She laughed too. But then the conversation turned slightly more personal. "What about relationships?" she asked. "Do you want marriage someday?" Marriage. That word carries different meanings across cultures. Some people imagine large traditional weddings. Others imagine quiet ceremonies. Some see it as a life goal. Others see it as a natural step when the right person appears. I answered honestly. Yes. But not quickly. "Why?" she asked. "Because a strong relationship takes time." She nodded thoughtfully. "I agree." Then she added something that made my heart beat a little faster. "But sometimes, you already know the person." Her voice was calm. But the meaning behind the sentence felt important. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Students walked past us laughing. Birds moved between the trees. The campus felt alive with spring energy. But inside that small moment, a quiet realization was forming. Our friendship had already become something deeper. We had shared stories, supported each other during difficult times, encouraged each other through English learning challenges, and spent countless hours talking about life. Psychologists often say that strong relationships grow from shared experiences and mutual support. Not dramatic romance. Not sudden passion. But consistent emotional connection. Looking back, our relationship had followed that exact path. Then she asked something softly. Do you think two people who meet in school can build a life together? That question felt very direct. But it also felt honest. Yes, I said. I think education connects people in powerful ways. She nodded slowly. My parents met in school, she said. That's interesting, I replied. They always said learning together helped them understand each other better. That idea made sense. Studying together reveals patience, personality, work ethic, dreams, and challenges. You see how someone reacts when things become difficult. And those observations matter more than romantic gestures. Later that evening we walked slowly across the community college campus again. The sun was setting behind the buildings. Golden light filled the pathways. Then she said something unexpected. If you ever got married in America, what kind of wedding would you want? The question made me laugh. I have never thought about that. Try, she insisted playfully. I thought for a moment. Something simple, I said. Maybe a small ceremony. Family. Close friends. Nothing too big. She smiled. That sounds nice. Then she added something quietly. I like simple weddings too. The conversation might have sounded casual to anyone passing by. But to us, it carried meaning. Because we both knew something important. When two people start imagining the same kind of future, their connection is no longer just friendship. But even then, neither of us rushed to say the obvious words. Sometimes feelings grow strongest when they are allowed to develop naturally. Without pressure. Without rushing. Just like our English learning journey. Slow. Patient. Consistent. And as we reached the end of the campus walkway, she said something softly. Education really does open doors. I smiled. Yes. Then she added one final thought. Sometimes, the door leads somewhere unexpected. At that moment, neither of us knew exactly what the next chapter would look like. But one thing was becoming clear. The Quiet ESL Classroom, the long English conversation practices, and the small moments shared across this American Community College campus had created something far more meaningful than either of us imagined. And soon, we would have to decide what to do with that feeling. Because the next chapter of our story would no longer be about school. It would be about building a life. Together. Building a family and a new life. Let me ask you something that might sound simple, but actually changes everything. What happens after two people meet while learning English at an American community college, slowly fall in love through hundreds of conversations, and begin imagining a future together? Do they continue their lives the same way? Or does life quietly begin building something much bigger, something called family? Because that was the moment our story was slowly approaching. And surprisingly, it didn't begin with a dramatic proposal. It began with a very ordinary conversation about the future. By the time we reached our second year at the community college, many things had changed in our lives. Our English-speaking skills had improved so much that conversations now felt natural. We could joke, tell longer stories, even explain complicated ideas. Sometimes we laughed remembering our first weeks in the ESL classroom, when even introducing ourselves felt terrifying. Now, English had become part of our daily life. But language wasn't the only thing that had grown. Our connection had grown too. One evening after class, we were sitting at the same small cafe near campus where we had gone for coffee months earlier. The place felt familiar now. The barista even recognized us. "2 coffees?" he asked. We both laughed. Yes. That moment made me realize something interesting about life in the United States. When routines repeat, places slowly become part of your personal story. A cafe becomes our cafe. A campus bench becomes our bench. A classroom becomes the place where everything started. And the community college campus had quietly become part of our shared history. That evening we were talking about something serious again. Future plans. She had recently received good news. She had been accepted to transfer to a university nearby. "That's amazing," I said sincerely. She smiled, but her expression looked thoughtful. "What about you?" she asked. "I'm still deciding," I replied. Transferring to a university had once felt impossible for me. But now the opportunity existed. My English listening, reading, and speaking had improved enough to handle college-level classes. But another question had quietly entered my mind. If our lives moved in different directions, what would happen to us? She seemed to be thinking about the same question. Finally, she asked something directly. "If I go to university, will we still see each other?" Her question was simple, but the meaning behind it felt big. "Of course," I answered. Then I added honestly, "I don't want us to disappear from each other's lives." She looked relieved. "Good," she said softly. Because sometimes life transitions can quietly separate people. New schools, new schedules, new environments. Many relationships fade during these changes. But something about our connection felt stronger than that. Maybe because it had grown slowly. Psychologists often explain that relationships built on shared challenges and long conversations tend to develop deeper emotional foundations. And we had certainly experienced many challenges together. Language barriers, financial pressure, cultural adjustment, and the emotional ups and downs of building life in a new country. Those experiences created trust. Trust creates stability. And stability allows relationships to grow into something lasting. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. Our ESL teacher, Mrs. Thompson, announced that our class would soon hold a small graduation ceremony. It wasn't a big event. Just a simple celebration for students completing the program. But for many immigrants, finishing English language classes in America represents an important milestone. It means you have crossed the first bridge. You can communicate. You can study. You can participate in society. The ceremony took place inside a small auditorium on campus. Students from many countries were there. Families. Friends. Teachers. Everyone looked proud. When my name was called, I walked across the stage and received my certificate. The moment felt emotional. Not because the paper itself was important, but because it represented the journey. The long nights. The difficult conversations. The moments when quitting felt easier than continuing. And when I looked into the audience, I saw her smiling. After the ceremony, we walked slowly across the community college campus one more time. The evening sky was soft and calm. Graduation decorations still hung near the building entrance. Then she said something thoughtful. It feels strange finishing ESL. Yes, I agreed. It feels like the end of something. But also the beginning, she added. She was right. Education always creates new beginnings. But then she stopped walking. She turned toward me. And she said something that felt simple, but important. When we met here, we were just two people learning English. Yes. Now we understand each other much better. I nodded. That was true. Language had helped us communicate. But time had helped us understand. Then she asked the question that had been quietly waiting between us for months. Do you think we could build a life together here? The question felt honest, direct, and meaningful. For a moment I thought about everything that had happened since the first day in that quiet ESL classroom. The nervous introductions. The slow conversations. The struggles. The encouragement. The laughter. All of it had brought us to this moment. Yes, I said finally. I think we already started. She smiled warmly. And suddenly the future didn't feel uncertain anymore. It felt like a path we could walk together. Life in America would still have challenges. Building careers. Managing responsibilities. Maybe raising children someday. But something important had already formed. Partnership. And partnership makes difficult journeys easier. That night as we left the community college campus, I realized something powerful. Education had done exactly what we once talked about months earlier. It had opened doors. Not just doors to careers or opportunities, but doors between people. And those doors had led us to something neither of us expected when we first sat nervously in that small ESL classroom. A shared future. And the final chapter of our story was about to begin. The lesson education gave me. Before this story ends, let me ask you one final question. If someone had told me on my first nervous day inside that small American Community College ESL classroom that learning English would one day lead to love, family, and a completely new life in the United States, I probably would have laughed. Because at that moment, I wasn't thinking about the future. I was just trying to say one sentence correctly. My name is. That was the level of my confidence. And yet somehow, step by step, conversation by conversation, life slowly built something much bigger than language skills. That's the strange power of education. You think you are opening one door, but sometimes it quietly opens 10 more. After finishing our ESL program, life continued moving forward for both of us. She transferred to a nearby university. I continued studying as well, slowly building my academic path in the American education system. Our schedules became busier. Assignments, work, responsibilities. But something important had already formed between us. Commitment. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies. The quieter kind. The kind built through patience, trust, and thousands of small conversations. We continued meeting often. Sometimes for coffee. Sometimes to study. Sometimes simply to walk across the same community college campus where everything had begun. And every time we returned there, it felt like visiting the starting point of our story. One evening, almost 2 years after the day we first practiced English together, something special happened. It was a warm evening. Spring again. The campus looked peaceful. Students were sitting on the grass, talking, laughing, studying. The same place where we had once struggled to form simple sentences now felt like part of our personal history. We walked slowly toward the bench near the library. Yes. The same bench where we had practiced English conversation for the very first time. She looked around the campus and smiled. Do you remember how nervous we were when we started learning English? I laughed. Yes. I could barely speak. Me too, she said. Then she added something thoughtful. But those conversations changed everything. She was right. Those slow, imperfect conversations had built confidence. Confidence had built friendship. And friendship had slowly grown into love. Then she looked at me with a soft smile. I have a question. What is it? I asked. Do you still want that simple wedding you described before? For a moment, I laughed in surprise. But I understood what she was asking. The future we had talked about months earlier was now standing directly in front of us. Yes, I said. I still like simple things. She nodded. Me too. That moment wasn't dramatic. There was no crowd. No music. Just two people standing on the quiet grounds of an American community college where their story began. And that was enough. A few months later, we had exactly the kind of wedding we once imagined. Small. Simple. Meaningful. Close friends came. Some classmates from our old ESL program came too. Even Mrs. Thompson, our teacher, attended. When she saw us together, she laughed warmly. I always suspected those English conversations were becoming something more. We laughed too. Because she was right. Sometimes teachers see things before students do. Life after marriage continued to bring new chapters. We both continued building careers. Working. Studying. Learning. Because learning never truly stops. A few years later, something even more beautiful happened. Our family grew. We welcomed our first child. Then later, another. And suddenly life became busier in ways we never imagined. Children running through the house. Toys on the floor. Bedtime stories. School lunches. Family photos. And sometimes, late at night, when everything became quiet again, we would remember something funny. Our entire family story began because two nervous students decided to practice slow English conversation together. That thought always makes us smile. Today, many years later, I still think about the lessons that experience taught me. Not just about language, but about life. Learning English in America was never only about grammar or vocabulary. It was about patience, consistency, courage, and connection. Language is powerful because it allows people to understand each other. But real understanding comes from listening, sharing, and being patient with mistakes. That's why learning English through stories and real conversations is so powerful. Because stories connect people. And connection changes lives. If you are watching this video because you are learning English, maybe feeling frustrated, maybe thinking about quitting, I want you to remember something simple. Progress is often invisible while it is happening. But every conversation matters. Every mistake teaches something. Every small effort moves you forward. You might think you are only studying vocabulary. But you never know what doors education might quietly open in your life. Career opportunities. New friendships. New confidence. And sometimes, even love. Because many years ago, inside a Quiet Community College ESL classroom, I learned something that no textbook could teach. Education doesn't only change your future. Sometimes it changes your entire life. Before you leave this video, think about something for a moment. What if the biggest change in your life doesn't start with a huge opportunity, but with something very small? A simple decision. One conversation. One class you almost didn't attend. Many people start learning English thinking it is only about vocabulary, grammar, or pronunciation. But sometimes learning English through stories, real conversations, and life experiences quietly changes something deeper inside you. Confidence grows. New friendships appear. Opportunities slowly open. And sometimes, a story begins that you never planned. Maybe right now you are watching this because learning English feels difficult. Maybe you feel slow. Maybe you feel embarrassed when speaking. But remember this, every fluent speaker once struggled with the same simple sentence. My name is. Progress in English listening, speaking, and real-life conversation does not happen overnight. It happens through patience, curiosity, and small daily practice. And who knows? The next English conversation you have might open a door you never expected. A new opportunity. A new friendship. Or even a new chapter of your life. If this story inspired you, don't stop here. Subscribe to the channel for more real English stories, slow English listening practice, and life stories in simple English designed to help you improve your English listening, speaking, and understanding naturally. Like the video if you enjoyed this story. Comment below, where are you learning English from? And turn on notifications so you never miss the next real English story practice. Because the next story might surprise you even more.